Hello and welcome to the Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything fantasy and science fiction. Your host is Matt Crosswhite, and the subject matter expert is Josiah Marshall. And here we go.
Everybody, welcome to another episode of the Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Crosswhite, joined by subject matter expert Josiah Marshall. How are you today, sir?
Doing well. Enjoying the nice cold weather that March has brought us with the snow and the ice and the water. Oh boy, the water. We needed the water. So
Have
it's
you been
good.
getting a lot?
Not a whole heck of a, well, I would say yes, but it's coming in large spurts. So we'll even warm up. Salt Lake City was at 68 degrees, which was a new record a few weeks ago. And now we're north of Salt Lake City, so we're definitely going to be colder. But uh, this morning it was 21 degrees finally, and it's been in the 40s. So
Oh, wow.
it's been fluctuating quite wildly. But
Yeah,
hopefully it'll stay cold and we can retain a lot of our snow and ice and yeah, keep that Great Salt Lake at level or above level would be good.
yeah, absolutely. That'd be fantastic. Well, I am now located in Tucson, Arizona, so absolutely no snow down here for us except at the very, very top of Mount Lemon. And we've gotten a little bit of rain in the last week, but it's been really very ordinary, nice temperatures down here.
Well, that's good. At least you
Yes,
have
very
some
mild. Well,
consistency.
yes, we'll have a different situation when summer comes, but for now it's just very nice.
Indeed, that's good. That's very good. Well, if it's all right, I'd like to take a moment. I know we missed an episode last week. Um,
We
we
did.
we my son had an accident, and so my son took precedence, and we just completely we're not we Matt and I know we both enjoy doing this, but given my son's accident and everything, we just could not get a chance to record. So I appreciate our listeners understanding that, especially all you parents. I'm sure get that when the kids get hurt, they become a priority. But he is recovering, and he's recovering well. It's going to take a little while. He sustained a concussion, but he is doing okay, which is good, and he's doing much better than the day it happened. So
Yeah,
thank God he's definitely improving. So as however
absolutely.
slow it can be with a concussion, but that's just the way it goes, I guess. Um, but I was excited about getting into this one because I was watching a movie last week actually, um,
Mhm.
and no, week before, excuse me, week before. And Netflix has this new movie out called Moon Rebel, and
Okay.
it it was everything that fantasy, sci-fi, but especially fantasy readers would want. And so, what I'd like to talk about today is imagery in fantasy and science fiction, because when you read these novels, one of the main features, especially for readers who are looking to get a new book or get a new author, they are looking at the cover art. As I've said in another episode, let's face it, we're going to judge a book by its cover. And what
It's
that
true.
what that picture does, it draws you in, it makes you interested, right? Have you found that to be the case for you?
Absolutely.
So yeah, I was watching this movie, and as a result of just some of the imagery, you could get that sense of epicness and that sense of scope, but you also got the sense of there is meaning just even in what you're doing. You've got two figures cresting a hill, and then there's the city right over there, set against a backdrop of a couple of mountains with the spaceport right in the middle of it. And just even setting up that picture, you have it in your mind right there, and you go, there is something quite captivating by that, right? To where you almost want, for some readers, especially for me, you almost want to have that gallery effect of when you're reading certain types of fantasy or science fiction. You want to have that imagery in place so that you can feel not only more involved in it, but that it can also go to some deeper connection. Some do you know what I'm getting at, Matt?
I do, absolutely.
So what was one of the stories that you've read that you have found imagery to be so iconic for you?
In the story or in the cover art specifically?
Either. Yeah, let's go with either of those.
Um, I really liked, I don't know, it seems like each different story or author has different types of cover art. I like the ones that are somewhat mysterious. I've mentioned, I think it was on this podcast before, that I'm reading the fifth season, and
Right.
the
By
cover art
JK.
is yes, and it the cover could be like a sealed door, or maybe like a locked tomb with a circular symbol, or it could be like a seal, like a king or an emperor's logo, and you look at it and um it's very well done, but there's an element of mystery. You don't quite know what that represents. So I like cover art that makes me
Exactly.
think.
Exactly. And as a result, then you want to gain what the meaning of that picture is, right? You want to develop that
Absolutely.
meaning between you and the story, and you end up having this sort of relationship with the story, so that the imagery becomes a character in itself. Um, now, bringing in scripture here for a second, there is the lady named Cindy Parker, Dr. Cindy Parker, and she has a course that she's done, and it's available online in some free platforms about the land of Israel and how it plays a role. And when we think of it in the terms of the land almost being a character and playing a part in the story, we go back to, say, Lord of the Rings. And I remember there was that scene where Gandalf's talking to Aragorn, saying, "Look for me on the fifth day to the east." And so with the movie, we get this hill that's kind of a cleft between and the mountain right there. And then here comes Gandalf, and then they spill over and then down in.
Yep.
Um, that whole thing, when you start to understand the background of the story, and you have this nostalgic, you have this personal connection with the story, that scene becomes so iconic that it carries over great meaning, even some purpose to it. And I've even seen some people say that there are, and I won't lie, there's been a moment where I've taken a scene out of a story and go, I want to experience that.
Yeah.
Whether it's a cabin in some woods or it's a nice shaded glen with a slight breeze and some birds chirping. Those are things that we do want. And so one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what do you crave when you see a picture like that in the story and you want to see it reflected in real life? What do you think that those images do? Why are we wanting to crave those moments, you think? Because you're the psychologist here. Well, you're the counselor here. So I was wondering if you had any insight on that.
Um, Not any sort of official insight, but I just think that we all want to be part of something bigger. We want to be part of an epic story, and we want our part in it to have significance. So like that moment when Gandalf crests the hill, we either want to be one of the ones riding on horseback right behind him, about to engage the enemy, or we want to be one of the ones that was standing on the wall of Helm's Deep and holding back the orc armies for 3 days until Gandalf arrived. We want to be part of this grand story, and so I think whatever imagery it is, we long for being in a good story. We want to be one of the ones standing on the wall at Helm's Deep and be able to say that we fought for 3 days to keep the orc armies away, or at bay until Gandalf arrived. We want to be part of an epic story, or any kind of story, even the cabin in the woods next to the creek. I think most of us don't appreciate our daily lives. We're going through the motions. We go pick up the kids. We go do stuff, but we want to be part of a story. And most of us don't recognize that our lives are a story unto themselves. But I think that's kind of the longing of the heart, and that's why we get drawn into sci-fi and fantasy novels or movies so much. Is because we long for that.
Right. And I like how you went there, because I was in the, I completely agree with you. I see it in a very similar way. I think that story tends to reflect our lives more than we realize. And whether it's a sense of adventure or a lack thereof, or a strength or the lack thereof, we tend to find in story what we're seeking, whether it's a sense of belonging or a sense of purpose or a sense of ability. And not to make story completely psychological, I think that it can end up being a reflection of our lives based on how well we're grounded and how our relationships are going, where we're at, whether we're content or discontent, and so on. I'm not completely removing the idea that story isn't just fun and enjoyable to read and participate in. I definitely,
of course.
definitely see that being there, especially for a lot of readers. I can also see for a lot of readers, especially for fantasy, I've noticed this more with fantasy and science fiction readers and fans, is that they really want to be there. There's this sense of non-belonging here where they're at. They don't feel seen. They don't feel heard. And I remember my wife and I, just to give an example, my wife and I have been watching this show called Young Sheldon. I'm not usually big into new TV shows, but we're giving this one a shot. And so far it's proving interesting. But one of the things that they've illustrated so far is that he's already feeling that he's different than everybody else, and that he's identifying with Spock and Data. And there was one episode where he's watching an episode of the original Star Trek, and Spock is talking, and he later revisits that scene in his head regarding something, and he's using the wisdom that he's getting from that character in order to figure out how he's going to relate and interrelate with people and be able to function in the real world. And so I see that being a big play in how people use and are attracted to story, especially fantasy and fiction and science fiction, excuse me. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I also think that's the reason that we have things like Comic-Con and Ren fairs, and because people like to be involved in, even up to and including dressing up the part and pretending that you are part of it. Even like Civil War reenactments. I know that's more just historical fiction or fiction, rather than fantasy, but I think it goes into the heart longing to be involved in a narrative that is more grand than the one we typically see as our daily lives.
I agree. And yet, not to make it sound so psychological, there is enjoyment in this. you get to connect with people over it. That's why we have Comic-Con. That's why we have these Star Trek conventions. To be able to go and be a part of a community of people that enjoy the same thing you do, it definitely helps people with a sense of belonging and gives them purpose and interest and joy in their lives. And it can be as much fun as people make it to be. It doesn't have to be something so esoteric or
Of course.
psychological
Of
in
course.
its use. But it's still fascinating to me that when I reflect on stories such as Narnia or Midkemia, Lord of the Rings, um, you, there's a lot of images that go through my head. I can picture the city of Minas Tirith in Lord of the Rings. I can picture the same picture that C.S. Lewis had when he first came up with the idea of Narnia, and that was with an image of a girl standing under a lamp, a street lamp, with the fawn standing there holding an umbrella. And it's just so amazing to me how much a part that truly is with storytelling. And when I was watching Moon Rebel, I thought this is definitely one way to capture an individual into this story. And that's what a lot of fans of fantasy and fiction are looking for. They want that grand scope of things, but they also want that image that they can capture and go, I know what it was like in this moment. I know what was going on in this moment. And it makes it, in some ways, I think, more personal, especially for fantasy and science fiction fans, because that's what they're looking for. And so I just found it absolutely fascinating. And I'm really interested to hear what other people have to say about it. But is there any, when I brought this up, I was curious, was there any scene from a story that popped into your head that you often think about or reflect on or just enjoy?
Oh gosh, there's a lot of those. I don't know to narrow it down to just one, but this conversation also reminds me, I'm going to take it a little bit different direction. It reminds me of a part of a book, one of Ted Decker's few non-fictional works is called The Slumber of Christianity, and how we're living the absolute best story ever written or ever told, and how many of us realize that on a daily basis. And he recounts in the story, in the book, a time when he asked his son, I don't recall how old his son was at the time, but he asked his son, if a UFO lands in the backyard and some little green people come out and come and find you, and they say, you are exactly who we need. You are the one that has been chosen, and you have all the attributes that we need. Will you come with us and rescue our people from this evil tyrant and help us? And he asked his son, would you go? And his son says, I mean, I love you and I would miss you and mom and my siblings, but yes, absolutely, I'd go. And he was just making the point that we've already made, that we long for story and to be part of something, but we often overlook that we're already a part of the most epic story ever.
I completely agree. I completely agree. And I've often wondered, even for myself, how have I used images out of a story to enable me in the lot and just here in the real world. And it gives me a sense of purpose, especially when you feel aimless or purposeless. But one of the other features I see going on with this sake of imagery is it is a desire to feel a connection with something. And in some cases, someone, because when you're looking at these images and you understand that there's characters involved, you're wanting to connect with those characters as well. And so, again, I'm not trying to be so psychological about this, but it really is fascinating to see just how much of a reflection on our lives our interest in imagery can be, because it continues to show more about where we're at in life and what we're longing for, what we don't have, but also where we want to be and where we want to go. I'm reminded of Dr. Seuss's book, Oh, the Places You'll Go. And he's got all of those pictures in there, but almost the words itself ended up becoming more of a picture than just those Dr. Seussian the air balloon, the figure walking through the tall buildings, but and it just, I guess each image is going to just meet you wherever you're at in a portion of life. But I also have those nostalgic moments though, where I see a picture and it just reminds me of a fond moment in my own real world memory of a person, place, or even thing, and being able to just have a happy moment with that memory. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
So not to beat a dead horse here, but I'm not going to. But I think that this topic, as fascinating it is, isn't really a long one. It's just one of those things I just noticed watching this movie that I just wanted to reflect on with you about, because as any fantasy, as I said, any fantasy or science fiction fan will know, when you find a story that connects with you, you're connecting with it through characters, you're connecting it through the tactile experience of the book or the place where you were when you read the book, but you're also connecting to it with the images that pop out at you from that book. And those images stay with you. And it's just amazing how those images can continue to have a gallery effect, a window effect even. And it's this place where we can escape to sometimes, a secret place, almost a safe place, but also a fun place where if it's so stressful at work, I'm going to just take a moment and drift back to the hills of Rohan, or the greenery of the Shire, or the glistening, crashing waves, the seas at Cair Paravel or something. So it's a wonderful part of what makes story so interesting and so personal for people, especially when, I think it's important to note that when authors give the reader a chance to actually paint the picture in their own mind, it's going to make that story even more personal and more of a favorite for readers, because in a lot of cases they want to participate, they want to be an active part of writing the story, because they want to be able to paint that picture in their own mind of what it looks like, the angles,
Absolutely.
and it's a fun part of it. And yeah, sorry, don't
And I think
mean to be, go ahead.
no, nothing to apologize for. I also think that that's one of the reasons that readers of fiction and sci-fi are often let down by a cinematic depiction of it, because we have this whole world built up in our head, and as the author has taken the time to describe how things look or where things are located, we build that in our mind, which is actually really good for your brain. It really helps with neuroplasticity, and research has shown that people that are voracious readers of fantasy of almost any kind, are far and above less likely to experience Alzheimer's and dementia type stuff. But anyway, we're it sometimes when we build this world up in our mind and then we go watch the movie. I remember for me that was there's nothing inherently wrong with the movie, but I had such a negative reaction when I first saw the Harry Potter movies, because the castle looked different in my head, and I had put Hagrid's house in a different location further away, and just all these different little things. It looked different in my mind's eye versus how they portrayed it on the screen. And neither is right or wrong. It was just different.
Right. Oh, I completely agree. I remember my kid saying one time he prefers listening to radio dramas than to watching something because then he gets to see it the way he sees it. And
Yes,
um,
exactly.
I think it's a great way to put it because I couldn't agree with you more. I've seen some stuff. The Aragon story by Christopher Paolini. Um, the movie was definitely lacking. You got a lot more out of the book than you did the movie. Um, and so I think that's a disadvantage, especially for the filmmakers, because not only are they contending with a book that they're having to abridge, but they're also contending with the fans that have high expectations of being able to see the places they see and to see it how they see it. And so um, that's the struggle when you get multiple artists uh, working off of one inspirational source. It can be very different. You're going to see it from multiple angles, and you're going to have people say, well, I like that one more than I like the other one. And then you're going to get the artists themselves. If they're I would think that if they're more attuned to what's happening here and how art is it can be very subjective and is subjective, then there might be more camaraderie with the idea of being able to use a source and have different ways of presenting it. But I remember Peter Jackson saying how frustrated he would get with not only Lord of the Rings, but especially with The Hobbit, because there were ways he wanted to do it, but it just, for him and being able to tell the story in a visual way, just didn't work very well. And it upset him even just as a fan because he couldn't get it to where he wanted to be. But at the same time, he said there were ways that his art took him into a way of seeing it in ways he hadn't seen before. And so I think it's a wonderful way of just how life itself, but how our imaginations can bring us together in showing us a way of presenting things in a different light and in a different way. And it can help anyone, including ourselves, see something differently. And it's really very neat, very, very neat. So that's pretty much it. That's what I wanted to talk about today. But it's something I'm really curious to hear if our listeners have any specific imagery or images in their head from stories that they've read that they cherish and they value a lot, or if there's ones that just remind you of those happy moments of where you were when you were reading the story. But yeah, it's just so cool.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's just so cool.
Absolutely. It really is. And one of the highest compliments you can give to an author when speaking with them is, I really felt like I was there in your story while it was happening. That's what
Yes,
a lot of fantasy and sci-fi authors are exactly shooting for. So this has been a
exactly.
really fun topic. I'm glad that you brought it up.
Well, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah. And so for our listeners, thank you for joining us on the Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi podcast. And we'll, Lord willing, assuming nobody else gets any concussions this week, we'll be back again next week with another episode. So we'll see you there.